It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about choosing a patron saint or a namesake is Rick Becker. Thanks for being here, Rick.
Thanks, Kyle. Good to be here.
I really enjoyed the article that you wrote for the National Catholic Register on this topic. So, and funny to hear who you were named after. Can you share that story?
Wow, you're going to make me do that on the radio, huh?
Hey, it's already public.
Yeah, I know. I'm just kidding. So I grew up in a Protestant household, and though I was baptized as an infant, there wasn't a tradition in the Presbyterian Church having godparents or a baptismal name. So my name Richard was actually based on my parents' political persuasion. I was named after Richard M. Nixon. So instead of, and as you saw in the article, so ever since I became a Catholic, I've been on a quest to create an association with a Saint Richard. You know, regardless of your listeners' politics, I was looking for an actual saint that I could have a relationship with going forward as a Catholic. And,
maybe a slightly
that's
better
what I was
example.
writing about.
Yeah.
What's that?
Maybe a slightly better example.
Yeah, a slightly better example, right, in terms of someone to emulate.
Right. So I guess maybe back up a second here. What is the point of having a patron saint, and what does the church teach about this?
Yeah, that's been something that has been real important for us as parents, too, in terms of how we name our own kids. But my understanding of what patron saints and baptismal saints and confirmation saints, what they're all about is that, number one, you are being connected by virtue of your name and at whatever intentionality on the part of the people who choose that name for you, in the case of baptism, parents usually, that's someone that's going to be praying for you, someone who's in heaven and will be praying for us in a particular way, and someone that we can have a relationship with going forward spiritually. But more than that, beyond that, I should say, with that, there's also, as I use the word emulate. We choose saints for our kids. We name our kids after saints because we want our kids to emulate their virtues, and hopefully, as they get older and they have that spiritual relationship with the saint who's praying for them in a special way, that they also would be looking into their lives and finding out how that person could be a model for them as they get older, and then also give them an idea of the kind of saint that they would want to choose for themselves when they are approaching the sacrament of confirmation. Then the third, I was thinking about this as I was driving in today, anticipating our phone call. You know, there's a third one too, and I think this has been true in my own case since I teach at Bethel University, which is a Protestant school, and so many of my students, virtually all of them, are Protestants. And when they hear about the names of my kids, they just say, "Wow, those names are really special. Where did those names come from?" I think the names, when we have a namesake, a saintly namesake, there's also an evangelistic dimension. There's a witness. And in the case of my own kids, especially like Benedict and Joan, less common names, that those are names that actually provide an opportunity for a witness. You know, wow, were you named for, somebody would ask, are you named for an aunt? Are you named for, my son's case, Benedict Arnold? And he'll say, well, no, I was named after St. Benedict. And gives an opportunity to share your faith.
Sure. So then how has your search been? As you mentioned, there's multiple St. Richards to choose from. What was your process for finding a new namesake?
Well, and actually that search started well before the internet, if I may date myself for a moment. So it required books, actual books. But I would look up St. Richards in different saints' texts. But I have to admit, my favorite, I mentioned three in my article, but my favorite is King St. Richard, who was the father of St. Walburga, who some of your listeners might know is a German abbess. And her shrine is associated with healing. But my family lived, when I was growing up in Colorado, we lived close to the Abbey of St. Walburga in Colorado. And so after I became a Catholic, I got to know the sisters very well. And then when I found out that St. Walburga's dad was himself a saint, and his name was Richard, that's the one I kind of glommed onto at first, and I've gone on to learn about some other St. Richards as well. One. Let me just mention the second one that I mentioned is St. Richard of Chichester, who was a bishop and a poet, and he. Some of your listeners will remember Godspell when it was at Marion, and growing up, a lot of your listeners will remember Godspell. But he wrote the prayer that was the basis for the song "Day by Day" in the musical Godspell.
Huh. So, what should we be looking for when trying to choose a namesake or a patron saint?
What should we be looking for? Well, I'm thinking now in terms of someone that we would choose for ourselves beyond, say, maybe a baptismal saint that we already have a connection with, and maybe a confirmation saint that we got to know when we were younger. But say somebody's looking at getting confirmed and thinking about that, or wanting to develop a new relationship with a saint, I guess I would look for. Just like any kind of friendship that you would, when you get to know people, you're not searching for someone to be a friend with, but you develop an affinity. You're looking for affinities. In my case, when I was looking for a Richard, but when I became a Catholic, of course, I got to choose a confirmation saint as well, and I chose Thomas More, who actually has a connection with the third Richard that I mentioned in the article, Richard Reynolds. Who suffered martyrdom at the same time that Thomas More did. But my confirmation name is Thomas More because when I read his story, I had this very kind of, very subtle kind of sense of connection, and I loved it that he was, his courage and his fidelity, and that he was unwilling to compromise on his conscience as far as fidelity to the Pope and to the Church. And those were all things that were values I highly valued when I was coming into the church. And when I came into the church, I was thinking I would study for the priesthood and go to seminary. But as I mentioned in the article, I ended up moving in a different direction vocationally, and became a husband and father. And in that sense, turned out that Thomas More was an especially appropriate patron for me as well. So some of it has to do with just affinities, and some of it has to do with maybe just tugs of the Holy Spirit. So just listen to those things as you're reading the lives. I mean, one way to start would be to just read the lives of the saints, and that's certainly something I would encourage folks to do. It's certainly a great way to grow in your faith, is just read those lives of the saints, and then if one of them kind of sticks out and you kind of get to know, you can develop that relationship with him or her.
Sure. We're talking with Rick Becker. He wrote an article for the National Catholic Register. You can check it out, ncregister.com. It's called An Embarrassment of Riches, My Quest for a Namesake, and a couple of good puns.
He's laughing at the pun there.
Yeah.
Sorry about the pun, folks.
No, that's the highlight here. But when we're talking about a patron, what is the likelihood that we're going to find somebody that we connect with that shares our name, or maybe a middle name or something like that? Is that important?
Oh, I see what you mean. Not necessarily. I mean, it is true that I'm not a canon lawyer, so all you canon lawyer folks out there, you'll have to correct me. But I think there is something in canon law that says that when we are choosing names for our children, they don't necessarily have to be saints' names, but they can't be names that would be contrary or inimical to the faith. So in other words, you wouldn't name your child like Satan, for instance, or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it is certainly a tradition in the church that we choose saints' names because of the very things that we've been talking about. And hopefully that we would be choosing saints for our children that we ourselves as parents we would want them to kind of aspire to their virtues and the kinds of people that they are. But for those who are coming into the church from another tradition, and their names that they were given as children weren't associated with saints, you can look them up. You can Google. You can find out what saints share your name, and then, like I did, you kind of choose one. But that's not even so important as I think what's more important is developing friendships with the saint you find drawn to, that you have affinities with. They're certainly great friends to have in our corners.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong, I assume, with having multiple patron saints and maybe having a couple of them that you have on for special occasions.
Yes, exactly. In fact, we even, when Nancy and I married, we started praying. We would pray to Maximilian Kolbe. We had thought about Maximilian as the name for our firstborn, but he became, in a sense, a patron for our marriage. And yeah, you could have different patrons at different stages in your life. I mean, Thomas More is a patron saint of lawyers. I'm no lawyer. I'm a nursing instructor. But certainly when you choose, if you begin to move in the direction of a career, you can get to know the saint that's associated with your career. Students can, when you're in school, you can be praying to Thomas Aquinas, and you can be praying to Joseph Cupertino when you're taking a test. So yes, there's all kinds of patronages that we can well, not to be redundant, but to patronize. We can patronize all those patrons for certain seasons of our lives and certain circumstances. And as I said, they're great folks to have in our corner, and they're ready and willing and able to assist us with our prayers and their own friendship.
Sure. Any suggestions, maybe outside of the expected of pray for your saint's intercession, maybe celebrating the feast day, you know?
Yeah. So you include praying for your saint, praying to your saint, asking for his intercession. I always like when I pray a rosary at the end, and I say, Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. Our Lady of Grace, pray for us. And then I always include my patron saint, to pray for me as well. But yes, it's funny you mentioned that. This is good timing, because we just celebrated the feast of Saints Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, and we did have, my family greeted me, and happy feast day, and it was a special day of celebration. So we always celebrate our kids' namesake, their baptismal name feast days. So yes, definitely do something special on those days in terms of yourself, and make sure you try to get to Mass on the feast day of your saint, and make it part of your family culture that you would commemorate and remember those special days. In the same way, and I would imagine many of your listeners do this already, that you celebrate baptismal days. So in our house, there's, just like in the church in general, there's always celebrations going on, right? We got birthdays, we celebrate baptismal days, we celebrate name days. And we, like the old saying, you fast when the church fasts, but you feast when the church feasts. And the more feasting, the more, the more the merrier.
Yeah. I love it. Such a great article. We just kind of tapped into a little bit of it. Very fun read. So people should check it out. An Embarrassment of Riches, My Quest for a Namesake. You can find it at ncregister.com. Also, check out Rick's blog, God Haunted Lunatic. You can just do a search for that. Thank you so much, Rick Becker, for sharing and inspiring us and challenging us to find a patron saint and to rely on that saint more often.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me on.